at number 5, the trial of Arne Cheyenne Johnson. Also known as the Devil Made Me Do It case, this is the first recorded court case in United States history that used demonic possession as basis for a defendant's claim that had ultimately resulted in the first-degree manslaughter of Connecticut man Alan Bono. It began with the Glatzel family after their 11-year-old son David had allegedly been possessed by a demonic beast who assaulted him in an attic. This manifested itself as David began to experience night terrors, exhibit strange behaviour and fall victim to unexplained wounds, scratches and bruises. Of course, after calling upon the services of a Catholic priest and finding no resolution, the family contacted Ed and Lorraine Warren. Soon after, Lorraine witnessed a black mist around David, an apparent indication of demonic involvement, as well as red hand marks around his neck, a demon choking him. The Warrens attempted to perform 3 exorcisms on the boy, where during one attempt the demon spoke out and said that David's stepfather, Arne Johnson, would commit a murder when the demonic host would go on to possess him itself. Well, that's exactly what happened, strangely enough, and Arne Johnson was convicted of first-degree manslaughter and sentenced to 10 to 20 years in prison. He still maintains that he was possessed by a demon to this day, despite the court not believing so. Coming in at number 4, The Werewolf of London. Well, that's a title if I've ever heard one. Do you know anything about lycanthropy? The supernatural transformation of a person into a wolf? On the other hand, scientifically speaking, defined as clinical lycanthropy, a rare psychiatric disorder that involves the delusion of bestial transformation, often exhibited as a wolf. Meet Bill Ramsey, a London man or wolf who had allegedly demonstrated demonically possessed lycan behaviour since the age of 9. In 1983, as a grown man, he admitted himself to an institution desperate to get help for his affliction. According to Bill, he would display superhuman strength and feel a rabid, frenzied urge to bite his family and relatives before succumbing to a strange seizure and convulsion. While in hospital, Bill had an overwhelming craving for blood and went on to attack a nurse while barking like a dog. A few years later, after being released from hospital, he went into a wolf-like rage and attacked a police officer with superhuman force. It took 6 more police officers to finally restrain the beast, leading to widespread news coverage and mass hysteria of a werewolf in London. Of course, this caught the attention of Ed and Lorraine, and they flew him out to Connecticut, performed an exorcism on the wolf demon, and he was right as rain. Job done. Everyone's a winner. Allegedly. Next up at number 3, the Warrens' psychic photography. Although admittedly not a single case but an exhibition of quite a large number, a technique that was woven by the Warrens throughout their career as paranormal investigators. Now take this with a pinch of salt, because for those that oppose the Warrens' claims, the majority of criticism comes from their specific technique of paranormal photography. The vast majority of the Warrens' physical evidence comes from photography, racking up hundreds of ghost snaps that form the basis of their alleged paranormal evidence, which must fit 2 specific instructions for it to make the grade. Use an autofocused or fixed focus camera with an automatic flash, and the more power the flash, the better. Supposedly, the more exposition of light, the more successful it will be to catch ghosts, specifically under Lorraine's technique, which pinpoints energy vortices and allows a spirit to manifest itself. They used this technique for the entirety of their career and it never seemed to change, but for me it is probably the weakest part of their casework and has the most holes when it comes to credibility. What do you guys think? Swinging in at our number 2 spot, Union Cemetery. According to local legend, the Union Cemetery in eastern Connecticut dates as far back as the 1700s and is infamous as one of the most haunted cemeteries in the United States. Luckily for them then, that Ed and Lorraine Warren lived pretty much next door to this hotspot hive of haunted activity. Very lucky. One of the most notorious ghosts in the graveyard is the White Lady, also known as the Lady in White, a spirit tortured by the tragedy of her mortal life. In some legends, the victim of betrayal by her husband, in other cases, murdered by her illicit boyfriend. Well, luckily for us, Ed Warren claimed to have captured footage of the White Lady on camera. He first recorded the White Lady on September 1st, 1990 at around 2:40 AM when he heard a woman weeping beyond the gravestones, looked out and saw hundreds of strange lights floating around, which manifested into the figure of a young woman dressed in white with long, dark hair. He screwed up when he walked towards the figure though, and the ghost disappeared. According to Ed's advice, you never walk towards the ghost, you let the ghost come towards you, because a human can change the molecular and magnetic field when a ghost is materializing. Useful. Well, sounds like crazy footage, right? Something to catch on camera. Well, unfortunately for us, Ed Warren refused to show evidence of this particular video, instead hoarding it for himself, despite urges for it to be analysed by the scientific community. And finally, coming in at our #1 spot, the Snedeker house. This one is pretty messed up even when you remove the paranormal element. Otherwise known as a haunting in Connecticut, which went on to inspire the Hollywood film of the same name, although Ed and Lorraine reportedly detested the film for its historical inaccuracy, claiming that so much more happened than what the film depicted. According to them, the real story involved the Snedeker family, who purchased their family home at a knockout price due to it serving previously as, wait for it, a funeral home and mortuary. Yeah, you're kind of just asking for it there really. Not only that, but there was also a graveyard outside. Take the hint. If you take local legend into account, the house was home to some pretty vile deeds where staff at the funeral home were rumoured to have been caught in acts of necrophilia, leading to an infestation of malevolent spirits. As events unfolded, the Snedeker family were terrorised by demonic occurrences, tap water running with blood, children being mysteriously spun around by invisible forces, and the family waking up to toe tags attached to them like that of a corpse. Now, this case has been hotly disputed, and the Warrens were famously criticised for their involvement with the Snedeker family, who were reportedly involved in some serious drug and alcohol abuse, which formed the basis of their paranormal claims rather than actually being terrorized by a demonic spirit. Nevertheless, Ed and Lorraine stood by their involvement as one of the most terrifyingly paranormal occurrences throughout their entire career, and Lorraine maintains this stance long after Ed Warren's passing.
And number 5, Guided by a Priest. In this video feature published by YouTube channel Gravity Media Productions, we see a film crew brought down into the occult museum by a priest who guides them on their tour. We get a glimpse of the Annabelle doll and the Warrens' satanic idol that was found in the early 90s in the woods of Newtown. The priest shows the crew the shadow doll and tells them the horrific story of how the doll entered a couple's nightmares collectively. He also shows the crew children's tombstones that were used as altars for satanic rituals. It's then followed up by a clip of Lorraine Warren saying how she refuses to go back down into the occult museum, especially now that she's lost Ed. It's just too risky for her. And at number 4, Mocking Annabelle. During an interview, Ed Warren tells a camera crew a chilling story about an instance that happened at the museum. One day, a young man and his girlfriend drove his motorcycle over to the occult museum and took a look inside. While in front of the Annabelle doll, he began to mock it, not believing that a demon truly possessed it. He challenged it to do something evil, all while tapping on the glass case that the doll is held within. Later on, as he drove away with his girlfriend, having a laugh over Annabelle and the other objects they had seen, the couple got into a tragic accident that ended his life and severely paralyzed his girlfriend. While it seems that perhaps it may have been Annabelle who was responsible for this, or at least that's what Ed Warren seems to believe.
The young man came here, felt it was nothing but a joke, started knocking on the glass, saying if this thing could perform any kind of evil act, to do it. 3 hours later, the young man was dead. He came here on a motorcycle with his girlfriend. She said they were laughing about the doll when they left. She was paralyzed in a hospital for over a year.
It could be that something else in the museum cursed them after hearing the mocking, since Annabelle is said to be extremely secure in the case that she's currently held within. Moving on to number 3, the Halloween Room. This video starts off as a cute little tour of Ed Warren's Halloween Room, which was attached to the Occult Museum. It's a nice little look at the collection of fun items that fans and friends have given him over the years, knowing how much he loves Halloween. But that's where the cuteness ends. From there, the tour goes into darker territory. Unlike many of the other tour videos we've seen of the Occult Museum, this tour has no background music, and it's pretty eerie. We hear Ed go on about how the Occult Museum is likely one of the most haunted places in the world. Ed says that it's not a building that anyone should be allowed in between the hours of 9 p.m. and 6 a.m., and how many of the objects in the room have resulted in people being maimed or killed, or resulted in individual sanity being harmed severely, with some having to go to mental institutions as an after effect of their encounter with these objects, all of which he claims are evil in some way. Moving on to number 2, the tour. Here we have footage from the Barefoot Paranormal's tour at the Occult Museum. It's a 15-minute walkthrough of the museum that feels like you're right there with the visitors, and gives viewers a very up-close and personal look at the objects featured. You can hear a lot of narration concerning the origins of many of the items that are visible too. Plus, a lot of it is shot through a camera using some sort of night vision feature, hence why the lighting at parts is so green and freaky. It just kinda makes it spookier. And finally, in at number 1, Moving Annabelle. We featured this video clip on one of our other recent lists about the famous Annabelle doll at the museum. It's the the real-life footage of Tony Spira, the son-in-law of Lorraine Warren, moving the Annabelle doll from her original case into a new, more secure and portable case. So yeah, doll came out of the case, was exposed to the elements. Very creepy if you believe in Annabelle. So he starts off the video by doing a series of prayers, and after other precautionary measures are taken, Annabelle is gently moved from one holding area to the next. Tony then conducts a binding spell. The whole video is a little nerve-wracking, and many an individual who has watched it has claimed to see the doll moving ever so slightly at various points of the 10-minute and 8-second clip.
Coming in at 5, the Southend werewolf. This is perhaps the most unusual case on our list. This investigation took the Warrens out of the US into a seaside town in Essex, England, where a man named Bill Ramsey lived, who was believed to be possessed by a demon that manifested as a wolf. Backstory: growing up, Ramsey was a normal kid. However, one day at the age of 9, he suddenly began to exhibit inhuman qualities. One report stated that while playing outside in his backyard, Ramsey felt a frigid cold overtake him. He was overcome with an awful stench before flying into a rage and uprooting a fence post, gnawing on its wire meshing. He remained incident-free up until the 1960s, during which time he was plagued with nightmares, cold sweats, and began to wake up panting like a wild animal. In the 1980s, Bill would become overwhelmed by the sensations he experienced when he was young, and at one point he attacked a friend in a car on their way home from a pub, and manhandled the police in an intense altercation. The Warrens were of course called in, during which time they stated that Ramsey would ask to be locked up in a jail cell for his protection, and the protection of the public. They ended up asking Ramsey to come to their Connecticut home, where Bishop Robert McKenna would perform a recorded exorcism on Ramsey. In at 4, Aunt Cheyenne Johnson. The trial of Aunt Cheyenne Johnson is baffling and the first known case in the US that used the devil made me do it as its defense. On the night of February 16, 1981, Johnson, who was just 19 years old at the time, was out for dinner with his fiancée and their landlord Alan Bono. Johnson stabbed Bono multiple times using his pocket knife and later went on to plead not guilty by possession, a defense that was founded on Johnson's relationship with his fiancée's brother, David. In 1980, David woke up to what he described as a man with big black eyes, a thin face with animal features and jagged teeth, pointed ears, horns, and hoofs. The demon-like creature scared David so much that he turned to his sister Ann Johnson for help. They turned to a priest, which only angered the entity more, causing it to make David hiss and quote Paradise Lost. The Warrens were brought in, and during one particular interview they stated, I quote, "While Ed interviewed the boy, I saw a black misty form next to him, which told me we were dealing with something of a negative nature. Soon the child was complaining that invisible hands were choking him, and there were red marks on him. He said that he had a feeling of being hit." The Warrens worked alongside 4 priests to exorcise more than 40 demons from David. However, Johnson seemed to be the new target, and after he stabbed his landlord, he was found guilty of first-degree manslaughter, after his claims of possession didn't hold up in court. Coming in at 3, Annabelle the doll. This case follows the now infamous Annabelle doll, a Raggedy Ann doll that was purchased in an antique store. It was gifted to the buyer's daughter, a nursing student. However, the student and her roommate very quickly began to notice odd occurrences involving the doll, including her changing positions and even leaving notes. Horrible. The messages eventually escalated and blood even appeared on the doll's dress. Annabelle seemed to take aim at the fiancé of one of the roommates, who claims he woke up one night frozen in bed as the doll crawled up his body and tried to strangle him. He also claimed that upon entering a dark room where the doll was sat, he felt something attack him. When he turned on the lights, he saw his stomach covered in bloody scratches, with the doll now on the floor. The Warrens were eventually called in, and they explained that the doll was possessed by the spirit of a deceased 7-year-old girl named Annabelle Higgins, but supposedly died on the land where the apartment stood. However, it was later determined by the Warrens that a demonic presence was in fact behind the doll. They ended up performing a blessing in the home before taking Annabelle and housing her in the Warrens Occult Museum. Coming in at 2, the Amityville case. This is perhaps the Warrens' most famous paranormal case, with the investigation being adapted into many frightening and unending films. The case involved the Lutz family, who took up residence in a suburban home in Amityville, Long Island in 1975, just 1 year after a deadly mass murder occurred on the property, which saw Ronald DeFeo Jr. brutally kill 6 members of his family. For 28 days the Lutzes were antagonized by spirits. They heard voices, saw swarms of flies, and were inflicted with welts. The Warrens were eventually called in to cleanse the home, bringing with them a local TV crew. While there, they snapped a handful of pictures, including one that seemed to show a boy with glowing eyes. The Warrens ultimately determined that the land was cursed, and Lorraine considered it to be the one case that continuously haunted her, stating, "Amityville was horrible. It was absolutely horrible. It It followed us right straight across the country. I will never go in the Amityville house ever again." End quote. And lastly, coming in at number 1, the Perron family haunting. This now infamous case follows the Perrons, a family that moved to an idyllic 200-acre home in Harrisville, Rhode Island, a home that hid some very dark and disturbing secrets. The home was originally built in 1736 and was inhabited by Bathsheba Thayer and her 4 children, 3 of whom died young. The deaths and circumstances around the deaths drew in a lot of suspicion within the town, resulting in them ostracizing Bathsheba, who was ultimately labeled a Satanist by her community. She then went on to hang herself in her own backyard. Now, during the Perrons' stay at the home, they experienced a lot of ghostly interactions, including spirits playing with her children. Bathsheba also appeared to them, only she was far more menacing than the children that haunted the residence. They heard disembodied voices and watched on as furniture moved on its own. The Perron family also stated that Bathsheba targeted the mother, Carolyn, and was jealous of her motherhood. The Warrens were ultimately brought in to help the family in 1974, however the presence only worsened the situation, so much so that the family asked the Warrens to leave. Coming in at 5, the Mary Celeste. The Mary Celeste was an American merchant brigantine which was discovered adrift and deserted in the Atlantic Ocean off the Azores Islands on December 5th, 1872. Yep, this is already setting up to be the perfect case for our friends Ed and Lorraine Warren, if they had been alive in the 1800s, that is. But alas, can't win them all. In November of 1872, the Mary Celeste took off from New York for Italy with 10 people aboard. However, nearly a month later, it was discovered by a British ship off the coast of Portugal. Save for a few feet of water, the ship was undamaged and still contained 6 months worth of food and water. The last entry in her log was dated 10 days prior. Her cargo was intact, and the captain and crew's personal belongings were undisturbed. None of those who had been on board were seen or heard from again. Creepy stuff, right? So what exactly went down? Well, nobody knows, or we have a theory. Some believe foul play, although the evidence in Gibraltar failed to support theories of murder and conspiracy. The suspicion of foul play lingered on. Insurance fraud was briefly suspected on the grounds of newspaper reports that Mary Celeste had been heavily overinsured. However, let's talk about the lifeboat. There was one lifeboat aboard the ship, which was never discovered. Now, one theory suggests that the transfer of personnel to the yawl may have been intended as a temporary safety measure. More speculation suggests that the state of the rigging and ropes that the ship's main halyard may have been used to attach the yawl to the ship, enabling the company to return on board when the danger had passed. If the line had parted, however, Mary Celeste would have sailed away empty, leaving the yawl to founder with its occupants. As of today, the fate of the Mary Celeste remains largely a mystery. Pirates would have left the ship in a worse state than how it was found, and mutiny seems unlikely. My money is definitely on sea monsters, or angry ghosts haunting the seas. If only Ed and Lorraine were around to give us the answers. Coming in at number 4, the Toxic Woman. Around 8:15 PM on February 19th, 1994, paramedics wheeled a young woman into the emergency room of General Hospital in the Southern California city of Riverside. The woman was awake, but responded to questions with only brief and incoherent questions. The woman was Gloria Ramirez, who was just 31 years old and had cervical cancer. Her blood pressure was extremely low and her heart rate was incredibly fast. Now this is where things get weird. Like, really weird. Doctors noticed an oily sheen on her skin and her mouth had a strange garlicky smell. When nurses went to draw her blood, they found that the sample smelled like ammonia, while others noticed her blood contained whitish particles. Not long after, the medical staff began to feel sick and faint, and by the end of the night, 23 workers were affected, with 5 even being hospitalized. After 45 minutes, Ramirez passed away from kidney failure. The incident would throw Riverside General Hospital into newspaper headlines for weeks, with the frightening possibility of toxic fumes capturing the public's attention. After years of forensic testing, explanation after explanation has been ruled out. No one will ever know what happened to Ramirez, though it was likely toxic. Other theorists are calling for something else. Something paranormal. Something that only Ed and Lorraine Warren could figure out. Coming in at number 3, Overton Bridge. Overton Bridge is a Category B listed structure over the Overton Burn on the approach road to Overton House in West Dunbartonshire, Scotland. It was completed in 1895 and designed by the landscape architect H.E. Milner. Though scenic and incredibly beautiful, this bridge has a haunting and unexplained mystery surrounding it. According to Glasgow skeptics, a tale of dogs leaping from the bridge to their deaths has been on the internet since 2005 when it was mentioned in passing on a forum about hidden sites in Glasgow. However, it was when the Daily Mail published an article about it that things began to take off. Now known as the Bridge of Death, at least 50 dogs since the 1960s have thrown themselves to their death in the gorge below. The canine deaths have prompted claims of paranormal activity at the bridge, with paranormal investigator Brian Dunning asking, is it possible for a dog to commit premeditated suicide? Yes. In 2019, the owners of the Overton House were interviewed for the New York Times, in which they said that in the 17 years that they lived there, they had seen a number of dogs which had become agitated, jump and fall from the bridge. Spooky stuff. However, it's not just the curse of the dogs that plagued the bridge. In October 1994, a man threw his 2-week-old son to his death from the bridge because he believed that his son was an incarnation of the devil. So sweet. Father of the Year. He then attempted to commit suicide several times, first by attempting to jump off the bridge, and then later by cutting his wrists. Honestly, the paranormal events surrounding this bridge will never be solved, but I would have loved for Ed and Lorraine to visit the site and try to reach out to the It's like a joke. It's a joke. But I would have loved for Ed and Lorraine to visit the site and try to reach out to the demonic forces surrounding it. One day. Their ghosts will come back. In at 2, the Atlas Vampire. The Atlas Vampire was an unknown assailant who committed the unsolved vampire murder in Stockholm, Sweden in 1932. Yep, you heard me correctly, a vampire, in 1932. On May 4th, 1932, a 32-year-old sex worker, Lily Lindstrom, was found murdered in her apartment in the Atlas area of Stockholm. She had supposedly been dead for 2 to 3 days before the police broke into her apartment. She had suffered blunt force trauma to the head and was discovered completely naked and face down on her bed. Now, what makes this case noteworthy is what was missing from the scene: blood. All of her blood. Considering the cause of death and trauma, aka blunt trauma to the head, nearly all of Lindstrom's blood had been drained from her body, and police found traces of saliva on her face and neck. However, what makes this even stranger is that police found a blood-stained ladle in her apartment, something that they believe was used to drain, even drink, her blood. It's beginning to sound like a vampire now, right? Well, it did to the press, who nicknamed the unknown assailant the Atlas Vampire. And to this day, the murderer has never been apprehended. Now, what I want to know is if this vampire is still lurking around, ladle in hand. If so, I wish Ed and Lorraine were around to deal with this vamp. It's like a joke. It's a joke, this video. And finally, coming in at number 1, the Pollock twins. The strange story of the Pollock twins begins in the quaint town of Hexham in Northumberland, England, with the family of John and Florence Pollock and their 2 young daughters, Joanne and Jacqueline. Things couldn't be better for the family until their idyllic life was met with tragedy on May 7th, 1957. When the 2 Pollock children were on their way to church with a friend, they were hit by a car driven by a local woman who had taken an overdose in a bid to kill herself. The 2 children were killed instantly. 2 years later though, their mother gave birth to twins, Gillian and Jennifer, identical twins in every way, aside from Jennifer's birthmarks that resembled similar marks on her deceased sister Jacqueline. After the twins were born, the family moved away to a different part of the country. This is where things begin to get weird. Gillian and Jennifer started asking for toys favoured by their dead sisters. And when the family moved back to Hexham, the twins supposedly recognised landmarks they had never seen before. These odd occurrences were enough evidence for Dr. Ian Stevenson to write about the twins in a book about reincarnation, claiming they were reincarnations of their older sisters. Now, it is worth noting that Stevenson himself considered the possibility that the twins were perhaps influenced by what their parents had said in the past, but he eventually came to the conclusion that it would have been impossible for them to mould their behaviours and recollections to match the dead twins. It is unknown what is going on with the case of the Pollock twins or what it means for the reincarnation as a whole. At the end of the day though, it's an unexplained phenomenon that only Ed and Lorraine could have solved. But alas, the world is cruel.
In at number 5, Annabelle. The Annabelle doll is the most prominent piece found in the Warrens Occult Museum, trapped inside a glass case with a sign that reads, "Warning, positively do not open." This Raggedy Ann doll was initially purchased in a thrift store in 1970 by a mother looking for a birthday present for her daughter Donna. Donna, who was in college at the time and shared an apartment with her roommate Angie, loved the doll at first and took it home with her. Over the course of the next few days, Donna and Angie started to notice something odd about the doll. It seemed to move around the house on its own. never where they had left it, and it would change its position. One time they even found it standing on its feet. Then strange messages written on scraps of paper started to appear all over their apartment, looking as if they were written by a child. A bit freaked out, Donna and Angie called a medium, who told them that the doll was possessed by a little girl named Annabelle, who had died in their apartment building years ago. Annabelle told the medium that she liked the two girls and wanted to stay with them. The young woman allowed it, but much to their dismay, they would soon find out that Annabelle wasn't who she said she was. One of their male friends named Lou stayed the night at their apartment and woke up in the middle of the night to find Annabelle next to him, appearing to move. The doll then tried to strangle him, and the next morning he woke up to find himself covered in cuts and burns. This is when Donna reached out to a priest, who then brought in the Warrens. The Warrens discovered that the doll wasn't actually possessed at all. Instead, a demon was manipulating it, trying to get close to the girls in an attempt to possess one of them. No thanks. In at number 4, the Smurl Haunting. In between 1974 and 1989, a couple by the name of Jack and Janet Smurl, who lived in West Pittston, Pennsylvania, claimed that a demon inhabited their home. Jack and Janet began witnessing strange happenings, the likes of loud noises and bad odors. The torment continued to get worse. Their dog was thrown into a wall, their daughter was pushed down their stairs, and Jack claims to have been physically and sexually assaulted by the demon on multiple occasions. The Warrens didn't get involved in the case until 1986, and the reports were pretty disturbing. Ed claimed to see a dark mass form inside of the home, and that the temperature dropped severely. The demon even left them a message written on a mirror that read, "Get out." By 1987, the haunting had calmed down to an extent, with Janet telling reporters that they still heard knocking and saw shadows occasionally. After the Smurls left the house, the new house owner told reporters in 1988 that she never encountered anything supernatural while living there. The Smurl haunting had generated a lot of press attention over the years, and there were a lot of doubts about the legitimacy of the Smurls' claims. And at number 3, the Perron family. You might recognize the Perron family as the story that is depicted in the first Conjuring film. Now, back in January of 1971, the Perron family moved into an old farmhouse, a 14-room building in Rhode Island. Roger, Carolyn, and their 5 daughters began to notice strange occurrences shortly after moving in, like missing objects, odd noises, and small piles of dirt appearing in previously clean rooms. The girls began noticing spirits around the house, most of which were harmless, but some were a bit more aggressive. Things got worse. The spirits would cause their beds to rise off the floor, and they would smell like rotting flesh. Carolyn researched the house and discovered that it had a long history of people dying from mysterious circumstances, with some hanging themselves in the attic, and others drowning in the creek nearby. One spirit in particular, Bathsheba, was a spirit of a woman who lived on the property in the mid-1800s, who was a Satanist, and was somehow involved in the death of a neighbor's child. The Warrens visited the farmhouse multiple times, and on one occasion, Lorraine conducted a seance, which led to Carolyn becoming possessed and speaking in tongues. The family, due to financial strain, was forced to live in the house until 1980, but reportedly the hauntings had ceased by then. Up next, number 2, the Enfield Poltergeist. The Enfield Poltergeist is the story that appears in the second Conjuring film. In 1977, the Hodgson family, who lived in Enfield, England, began to see and hear strange things in their home, including a dresser sliding across one of the children's bedrooms. Toys would fly around the house and were burning hot to the touch. Loud knocking sounds shook the house, to the point where they had to call the police, believing that someone was trying to break into their home. The officer who came to the scene reported seeing a chair rise up into the air and move across the floor all on its own. Reporters from the Daily Mirror were also present at one point, and they claimed that they had also witnessed some of these strange occurrences. The situation really started to attract some solid attention when one day, the iron fireplace in one of the bedrooms upstairs was ripped out of the wall. Warrens came to the house and upon investigating declared that there was a demonic presence there. While the film depicts an almost exorcism, the real-life story is quite different. 2 years after the hauntings began, they abruptly stopped. And finally, in at number 1, Amityville. Even if you're unfamiliar with the specifics of this story, you've probably at some point heard the name Amityville in correlation with horror or hauntings. Amityville is a real-life place, approximately 30 miles outside of New York City. And back in 1974, a 23-year-old man named Ronald J. DeFeo Jr. murdered his entire family with a rifle while they slept. 13 months afterwards, a new family purchased the house, the Lutz family, who stayed there for 28 days before fleeing. The Lutz family claimed that their house was haunted by a violent spirit. After their first night there, the family began constantly getting into arguments. Their daughter started to spend all of her time playing with an imaginary friend named Jody. Awful odors emanated from all over the house, and black stains started to appear on various surfaces. Flies started to appear in one of the upstairs rooms that they had turned into a sewing room. George Lutz, the father, would always wake up at 3:15 a.m., the time in which the DeFeo murders occurred according to the police. Family members started to appear aged and would levitate, so finally they got a priest to walk through the house. But the family still continued to be terrorized. 20 days after the family left the house, the Warrens Warrens were called in to investigate. While they were there, Ed was violently pushed to the floor and Lorraine was overwhelmed by a demonic presence, and saw the psychic impressions of the DeFeo family's bodies laid along the floor. Further research into the house revealed that it was actually the site used by a man named John Ketchum in the early 1900s, who practiced black magic. They also captured an image of a boy peering from the second floor of the house. The Lutzes eventually sold all of their belongings, some to the Warrens, and relocated to California. Starting us off in at number 5, Annabelle. Here we have a clip of Lorraine Warren that's fairly recent, talking about the real-life Annabelle doll. Doll, which was given to a college student by her mother as a gift, turned out to be a doll that was manipulated by a demon in an attempt to possess her or her roommate. The events surrounding the doll and why Ed and Lorraine were brought in are eerie at best. It began with the doll moving around the house on its own, and even resulted in one of their friends being brutally attacked by it, with the doll strangling him. Here's what Lorraine had to say about it when the second film inspired by the doll, Annabelle Creation, came out.
Evil needs a body to go into, and if you're vulnerable, it's going to be you.
And at number 4, Amityville. Here we have a recording of Ed and Lorraine retelling their experience with the famous Amityville house in Long Island. Now, at the time when they were called, they didn't realize that the house had been the location of 6 previous murders. Here's Ed describing what they experienced when they first got there.
We went into the house that day. We didn't realize that it was diabolically infested. He went to that shrine and he brought back from there a priest, an exorcist, who said masses in the house. Why? If this was a hoax that was created by the Lutz family, why 6 months before this man was murdered and his family was an exorcist in that house?
Eerie stuff. The Amityville horror case has long been criticized as being a hoax perpetuated by the Lutz family, but from what the Warrens claim, it was a sinister place long before the family had the unfortunate luck of moving in there. Up next at 3, The Haunting in Connecticut. This particular case is concerned with a haunted funeral home, and it happened in 1988. The couple had gotten a call from the homeowners saying that they were being tormented by ghosts, to the point where the assaults were even sexual in nature. Now, the house had been converted from a funeral home to a regular house before they had bought it. Believing that necrophilia had occurred there in the past, the Warrens had this to say about what they discovered there.
The instruments they used for embalming, the embalming table, the chain hoist, everything was still there. But there was lumber all over. There was also what they called the sales coffin room, where they put the caskets.
And at number 2, The White Lady of Union Cemetery. In East Connecticut, there's a spirit that Ed and Lorraine had made various attempts to capture via psychic photography. According to Ed, people had claimed to see a lady in white walking around the cemetery, so the couple investigated it. Ed stayed in the graveyard for 7 nights, leaving his home around midnight each night, and waited with his camera. He tells of how on September 1st at 2:40 a.m., he saw the White Lady. Here's what he had to say about it.
I'm sitting there and I could see all these lights over near the Baptist cemetery, all around the stone wall, and all these thousands and millions of insects were just chirping away. All of a sudden things started to quiet down, and I could hear what sounded like a woman weeping. I took the camera out and I could see all these ghost lights suddenly forming into a figure of a woman.
He goes on to say that he wasn't able to see her through his camera, but only with the naked eye. He put his camera on his tripod and let it run, and tried to walk towards her, but she disappeared. So he backed away, and that's when she reappeared. He then saw some shadow ghosts holding her back from him. He claims that a shadow ghost then pushed her towards the road, and then she was gone. And finally, in her number 1 spot, Bill. The Enfield poltergeist is one of the Warrens' most publicized cases. It was the topic for the Conjuring 2 film, in which we saw the Warrens, played by Patrick Wilson and Vera Farmiga, attempt to help the family rid themselves of spirits who were severely haunting them in the late 70s. The film actually used the audio recordings that the duo recorded while at the house as inspiration. Take a listen. As you can hear, the demon's voice is audible talking to Ed. The demon was possessing one of the 4 children, a girl named Janet, and the voice was said to have been called Bill. This is by far the most famous audio recording of the Warrens. Starting us off in at number 5, Psychic Photos. If you're a fan of our channel, you may remember a video that we did on the eerie objects and artifacts that you can observe at Ed and Lorraine's Occult Museum in Connecticut. Well, here they go into detail about one particular type of creepy object that they have a handful of at their museum: psychic photographs. So what are psychic photographs? According to Ed Warren, a psychic photo is a phenomenon in which a camera, being an impartial witness, captures a ghost on film. But the crazy thing is that the image that you see of the ghost is one that it projects itself, an image of what it believes it looks like. This clip explores how exactly that happens, and the Warrens describe instances in which they've witnessed spirit forms appearing beyond the physical eye. Ed also tells of how he captured the White Lady of Union Graveyard with his camera, one of their most famous images.
We could put the first slide up and look at it. Wow.
Well, there you're seeing your stereotype ghost. Look at the appendage-like arms and legs. You know, when you see these little cute ghosts that are painted and drawn on Halloween, this is your stereotype ghost right here.
And at number 4, the Amityville House. This piece of footage, published by Mysterious World, features Lorraine Warren retelling her experience at the Amityville House. The Warrens in the past had gone to the famous Amityville House. It's one of their most famous cases. It's the place in which a man named Ronald DeFeo Jr. shot and killed 6 family members of his in 1974. And a year later, a new family, the Lutz family, had moved into the residence, only to be terrorized by a violent demonic presence. The Warrens had visited the house in an attempt to help the Lutz family, part of which was adapted into the 2016 movie The Conjuring 2. In this video clip, we get more insight on what the real-life events that occurred there were like. Lorraine tells her interview that, I quote, "Places like Amity, if you gave me $1 billion, I wouldn't go in that house again, because it messed up my life and my husband's life." She also tells the interviewer that the Amityville house was where she levitated, which is pretty creepy. And at number 3, the effects of seeing a ghost. This 7-minute video features Ed and Lorraine Warren alongside a guest of theirs named Rod. Rod had seen multiple ghosts and has a discussion with the paranormal experts about the aftermath of seeing a ghost and how it affects one's life. He goes on to explain the intense sorrow that he felt after seeing the ghost, which just so happened to be the White Lady of Union Graveyard. He experienced night terrors, was extremely upset, and had excessive tremors for months, recurring whenever he was reminded of the event. Ed goes on to explain that the sadness that Rod felt is something called radiotelethesis, which happens when a human picks up on the emotions of a spirit when they have a close physical encounter. The fact that something like this could occur to any individual is pretty darn creepy.
A good friend of mine had died, and a couple nights after that, sitting in my bedroom, I saw the figure of a woman in front of my windows. So my bed was on this end of the room and my windows were there. And from the light coming in, I could see a woman sitting looking out my bedroom window, and where the window ended, that's where the figure ended.
And at number 2, the Borley Rectory. The Borley Rectory is said to be one of the most haunted places in the UK. A nun had been buried within the walls of its church, and once found was moved to a nearby graveyard. But ever since, there's been some serious haunting. According to this video though, Ed and Lorraine have been to that location over 200 times. Talk about courage. The duo discussed their first experience at Borley Church in 1976, with Lorraine saying that the investigator that she was with, who was very skeptical to begin with, was assaulted by a spirit, claiming he could not breathe, and that something was pushing him. Later on, they listened back to the audio that they were recording while they were there. Lorraine said that you could hear a woman's voice over his screaming, saying the words, "Hit him, hit him." And finally, in at number 1, poltergeists. In this clip from a documentary, Ed and Lorraine talk about poltergeists and their dangers. It features a clip of them that they recorded with a family in Connecticut dealing with a poltergeist, with the family's face blurred out in order to give them privacy. It starts off with the group saying prayers, and then Ed tries to communicate with the spirit. We hear the spirit making banging noises in response. Ed proceeds to ask the spirit who it doesn't like, listing off each individual in the family. It finally answers yes via the knocking to the family's mother. Then Ed confronts the poltergeist on his own, and we see chairs and furniture moving around the room. The video continues, showing a clip of the family's little girl being bothered by the poltergeist, who moves the chair that she's sitting on. The Warrens would then later call a priest to perform an exorcism, which wasn't on camera. Arguably, you can see why. Although by the end of the clip, the two of them note that there's no way of knowing if a poltergeist may or may not come back to haunt the family.
In the name of Jesus Christ, I command you to reveal your identity.
Coming in at number 5, Union Cemetery. Union Cemetery is located near Stepney Road in eastern Connecticut. The site dates back to the 1700s, and according to ghost hunters, it is one of the most haunted cemeteries in the entire United States. Now, as you'd expect, Ed and Lorraine Warren were quick to involve themselves in the mystery surrounding the cemetery, with the pair even writing a book about the site entitled Graveyard. According to popular legends, the White Lady ghost haunts Union Cemetery as well as Stepney Cemetery in Monroe. The white lady has been seen walking in front of people's cars as they drive along Route 59 late at night. Concerned drivers believed that they had hit a person, exit their vehicles only to discover there was no one there. The white lady name comes from witnesses who states that she wore either a white gown or what appeared to be a wedding dress. Now in 1990, Ed and Lorraine Warren set up cameras in the cemetery to record the investigation. Around 2:40 a.m. they heard the sound of a woman weeping, and a female form had begun to move several feet in their direction. As Ed began to approach her, she vanished from sight. Nowadays, the cemetery is known to close after sunset. Coming in at number 4, we have the werewolf in London. Bill Ramsey from Southend-on-Sea in England was considered living proof that werewolves actually exist. Now, the first inkling of trouble for Bill came when he was just 9 years old. One day he was outside in his garden playing when he began to feel strange. An icy blast swept all over him, perspiration froze on his skin, and a foul stench made him need to vomit. Then, out of nowhere, anger and rage took over, and young Bill uprooted a fence post, with the fence still attached, and began swinging it around like a club. Should be noted that not even his parents could remove that fence post. Now, all returned to normal for a while. Ramsey grew up, became a loving husband and father of 3, and was instant-free up until the 1960s. During this time, he began to be plagued by nightmares, cold sweats, and waking up panting like a wild animal. Not long after, he began to feel the same sensations he had that day in the garden when he was 9, and on one occasion he attacked a friend in a car on their way from a pub and manhandled police on several occasions. In turn, Ramsey was forced to spend time in the hospital, where it was noted that he exhibited inhuman strength, growling, and his hands would often curl like claws. Ed and Lorraine Warren were thus called in to investigate. Ed Warren stated that, I quote, "Ramsey would ask to be locked up in jail cell for his protection and the protection of the public." The Warrens then invited Ramsey to their Connecticut home, where Bishop Robert McKenna would perform a recorded exorcism on Ramsey. Coming in at number 3, we have the Enfield poltergeist. Between the years of 1977 and 1979, the Enfield poltergeist terrorized a small London house in the Enfield suburb. The case involved 2 sisters, aged 11 and 13. In August 1977, single-parent Peggy Hodgson called police to her home, claiming she had witnessed furniture moving and that 2 of her 4 children said that knocking sounds were heard on their walls. The children included Margaret, who was 13 at the time, and Janet, who was 11. A police officer who investigated the scene recalled seeing a chair wobble and slide but could not determine the cause of movement. Later, claims included disembodied voices, overturned chairs, and the children even levitating. Over the next year and a half, more than 30 people said that they saw heavy furniture moving on its own accord, objects being thrown around the room, and the children levitating. These people included psychic researchers, neighbours, and journalists. Creepier still, the young daughter Janet was also recorded speaking in a deep masculine voice, which was believed to be the spirit of an old man. Of course, the Warrens were called in to investigate this paranormal behaviour, which they found was a case of demonic possession. Janet later went on to admit that she had played with a Ouija board prior to the disturbances, and that she was unaware that she fell into the trances until she saw photographs later on. However, many have called the Enfield poltergeist fake, with Janet being detected in trickery, with a video camera catching her bending spoons and attempting to bend an iron bar. So whatever you believe is up to you, legend or reality. Coming in at number 2, we have the Smurl family. The Smurl haunting refers to claims made by Jack and Janet Smurl, who alleged that a demon inhabited their home between 1974 and 1989. The family moved to West Pittston, Pennsylvania with their young daughters and Jack's parents, who all lived together in one house, and supposedly suffered the worst 13 years of their entire lives. Not long after moving into their new home, they claimed that the premises was disturbed by a demon that caused loud noises and bad odours. Through their dog into a wall, shook their mattress, pushed one of their daughters down a flight of stairs, and physically and sexually assaulted Jack on several occasions. The family were terrified and called in Ed and Lorraine Warren for help. The pair quickly discovered that the family home was infested with 4 spirits: an elderly woman who was harmless, an old man who had died at the house, a young and violent girl, and a demon that controlled the other spirits and had turned them against the family. By 1987, the family decided to leave the home once and for all, and 2 years later, a church church-sanctioned exorcism took place there, and the property was cleared of all paranormal activity. And finally, coming in at number 1, we have the Amityville Horror. The Amityville Horror is perhaps one of the, if not the most famous paranormal cases Ed and Lorraine Warren investigated. However, like the rest of our list, there is always debate as to how much was actually true. Some backstory to begin though. On November 13th, 1974 at 3:15 AM, Ronald DeFeo Jr. killed his parents and siblings with a rifle while they were sleeping peacefully in their beds. Around a year later, the Lutz family moved into the home on Ocean Drive. However, after just 28 days, the Lutzes left the house claiming to have been terrorized by paranormal phenomena while living there. Supposedly during their time living there, a priest was called in to bless the home, and he warned the family, do not use the upstairs room as a bedroom and do not let anyone sleep in there. Within days, things began to go wrong for the happy family. Their young daughter made an imaginary friend with a red-eyed pig. Foul odors filled each room, furniture moved and levitated, and banging would frequently be heard throughout the house at night, in turn forcing the family to flee. Enter Ed and Lorraine Warren. The pair investigated the house and soon discovered that the land the house had been built on had previously been used by a practicing black magician who had requested to be buried on the land, and he remains there to this day. A TV crew was also called in to film the investigation, with them snapping a photo that seemed to show a boy with glowing eyes. In a 2013 interview, Lorraine Warren said that the Amityville house was the one case that haunted her the most. She also went on to state during a press conference for The Conjuring, I quote, Amityville was horrible. It was absolutely horrible. It followed us straight across the country. I will never go to the Amityville house ever again. Whether you believe the story or not, something certainly spooked the Warrens enough to never return there again.
Coming in at number 5, we've got The Haunted. Before the Amityville Horror, before The Haunting in Connecticut, and definitely way back before The Conjuring, there was a horror movie focused on a Warren case without the backing of any Hollywood studios. There was a horror movie focused on a Warren case that wouldn't make it to theaters. That's right, a made-for-TV movie featuring all the haunts and scares you'd expect. Based on a book of that same title, it takes a look at one of the lesser-known Warren investigations. The Haunted aired first in 1991 and took a swing at dramatizing the Smurl haunting. Jack and Janet Smurl claimed that a demon inhabited their Pennsylvania home for more than a decade, leading to them seeking the help of the Warrens. This demon caused them all sorts of pain and suffering, from generating loud noises and bad smells to pushing people down the stairs. Apparently it even threw their dog at the wall one time. After all these horrific events, they reached out to Ed and Lorraine. The couple came to town and performed a series of tests to see what could be done about the demon. They attempted to play religious music and pray, but this just caused the demon to amp up its performance. Ed reported that mirrors would shake and often the temperature would severely drop. Dark masses were sighted, and at one point they even got a message written on a mirror, demanding that they get out. All in all, a pretty classic haunting. And while The Haunted doesn't connect with the Conjuring universe, it's still a pretty decent little horror movie. In fact, it even garnered Sally Kirkland a Golden Globe nomination for her performance as Janet Smurl. So if you're looking for a little bit of a throwback and are interested in one of the earlier depictions of the Warrens on the big, or in this case, small screen, here you go, The Haunted. Coming in at number 4, we've got The Haunting in Connecticut. This one is particularly interesting as there's some controversy surrounding its claim to have been based on a true story. So the movie is supposed to be based on the experiences of Carmen Snedeker and her family. They moved into an old house that was once a funeral home, which usually results in some spooky stuff happening, right? This decision to move into a creepy place was influenced by the fact that their son was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma and wanted to be closer to the hospital. After settling into the abode, they started finding evidence that the home was once full of dead bodies. Embalming tables, mortician's tools, and more were discovered, tipping them off to the previous purpose of the place. These details led a lot of people to not believe the tale from the get-go, but if you take the family's need for hospital proximity into account, maybe it makes a little more sense. Then started all the paranormal happenings, from objects moving when nobody was looking to the kids seeing strangers wandering around the house. A few months of this, and the Snedeker family reached out to the Warrens. With their arrival on the premises, things got a little clearer. Ed and Lorraine moved into the haunted home and discovered some new things about it. Apparently the morticians who lived there practiced necromancy, which ended up imbuing the house with a terrible curse. This explained the unexplainable events and gave a rationale for what was happening. They then performed an exorcism and claimed that the house was safe for the family to inhabit. Many folks connected to the Warrens and this story say that a lot that happened was exaggerated, which tends to be the case with a lot of paranormal investigations. A lot of it is up to interpretation, and the true story angle to this movie is especially dubious thanks to how they handled it. See, the Warrens don't make an official appearance in the movie, and a lot of the discoveries are made by other people. And in the end, the narrative chose not to do an exorcism to cleanse the home, but use a purifying fire to drive the spirits out instead. So while The Haunting in Connecticut is definitely inspired by a real-life Warren case and pulls a lot of elements from it, the facts are played pretty fast and loose. What can you expect though, right? Coming in at number 3, we've got Annabelle. If we're talking about big horror movies heavily inspired by the Warrens, it's just about impossible to ignore Annabelle. The Conjuring universe as a whole owes pretty much its entire existence to Ed and Lorraine, but their tale of Annabelle the doll is probably one of their best known. Creepy dolls work a special kind of magic, don't they? It's hard to imagine talking about cursed objects, paranormal museums, or uncanny investigations without bringing up everyone's favorite Raggedy Ann / porcelain nightmare. Tales of the 2 nursing students and their experience with this supposedly haunted doll have taken up a whole lot of space in modern pop culture mythology. And with the original Annabelle movie garnering enough attention to spawn 2 more movies and a whole bunch of tie-ins, they're definitely doing something right. Developing a brand new, cinematic universe-friendly story for the doll, we learn that in these flicks, Annabelle is a doll haunted by the estranged cultist daughter of a seemingly normal family. It takes a whole lot of twists and turns, and once a movie hits 2 sequels, you're bound to run into some pretty out there moments. But the OG Annabelle offers enough spooky moments and iconic doll scares to firmly cement it into the horror conversation. And of course, the famous glass case in which Annabelle is kept at the Warrens Occult Museum has a role here. Coming in at number 2, we've got the Amityville Horror. Another famous Warren case that garners a whole lot of controversy, the Amityville Horror pulls from all sorts of accounts. The main source seems to be Jay Anson's novel of the same name, which claims to be based pretty directly on the events at the Amityville house. However, there are lawsuits and claims of untruthfulness abound, so tread carefully. You probably know the story of the Lutz family by now, but here's a quick refresher. In 1974, Ronald DeFeo Jr. murdered his entire family at 112 Ocean Avenue in Amityville. He said that the voices in his head made him do it, and was promptly carted off the prison. A year later, George and Kathy Lutz decided it's a good idea to move into the home where this atrocity took place. Soon after, they began experiencing some classic haunted hijinks. Their kids saw phantoms, the family dog is done away with, and for some reason, George keeps waking up at 3:15 a.m. There is something spooky going on here. You can watch 2 different versions of this one too, which makes a lot of sense considering how famous the case was. This is arguably the Ed and Lorraine Warren case. So take your pick of either the 1979 or 2005 one and have a blast. And coming in at number 1, we've got The Conjuring. And here we are with the film that launched the biggest horror franchise running. Over $1 billion and something like 8 films later, we've got quite an overview of the Warrens through horror movies. The brainchild of James Wan and Michael Blum, it took a look at the case of the Perron family and their Rhode Island farmhouse. Honestly, there's a lot of great stuff here. The original Conjuring, when it released in 2013, was a solid horror flick with some awesome scares. Who could forget the clapping game, right? Although, as the franchise chugs along, the Warrens are often portrayed in an extra dramatic light, or sometimes not at all, but when you connect all sorts of different legends together, you can afford to do that. In the movie that started it all, their roles seem pretty close to their real-life actions though. As real as you can get while portraying paranormal investigators in a fictional horror film anyways. Flicks before this one did their best with all sorts of spooky stories, but none really delved into the legend behind the creep-hunting couple themselves. I'm sure countless other horror movies have in some way been influenced by Ed and Lorraine, but it would be a little harder to prove.
Coming in at number 5, we have The Conjuring House. Upon its release in 2013, The Conjuring quickly became a fan favourite in the horror genre, with it being met with critical acclaim. The film itself follows demonologists and ghost hunters Ed and Lorraine Warren, who head to a home in the country after a family reported demonic activity inside of their home. Now, at the time of the release, people knew very little about Ed and Lorraine Warren or the true events surrounding this investigation. The Perron family moved into their haunted Rhode Island home in 1971. Not long after, Carolyn, Roger and their 5 daughters began to experience strange goings-on. Brooms going missing, scraping noises, and small piles of dirt appearing out of nowhere. All small things at first, which soon developed into big things. The girls eventually began to notice spirits around the home, with the history of the home soon being revealed. Many people had drowned in the lake, and of course the worst spirit of them all was Bathsheba, a woman who devoted herself to the devil and took her own life on the property, cursing anyone who would take her land. Ed and Lorraine Warren of course came to investigate the situation, with Lorraine conducting a seance to attempt to communicate with the spirits tormenting the family. During the seance, Carolyn became possessed, rising from the ground in her chair and speaking in tongues. Following the seance, the Warrens were kicked out of the home, with the family continuing to live there until 1980. Before we jump into number 4, be sure to give this video a big thumbs up, it really helps out a lot. Coming in at number 4 we have Amityville. Back in September of 1977, Jay Anson published a book called The Amityville Horror, which would later become the basis of a series of films released from 1979 onwards. The book is claimed to be based on the paranormal experience of the Lutz family, a case which of course led to many controversies and widespread attention. Now, some history before diving into the story of the Lutz family. Back in November of 1974, Ronald DeFeo Jr. shot and killed 6 members of his family at 112 Ocean Avenue in the suburban neighborhood in Amityville. He was ultimately convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 6 life sentences, with him passing away in custody in March of this year. Now, DeFeo had reported that voices had told him to kill his family. Whether these claims were true, we don't know. Jumping forward, in December of 1975, George and Kathy Lutz and their 3 children moved into the same home, and after just 28 days they fled the house, claiming to have been terrorized by paranormal entities while living there. On the evening of March 6, 1976, the home was investigated by Ed and Lorraine Warren along with a television crew from Channel 5 New York. During the investigation, a series of pictures were taken, one of the images allegedly showing a demonic boy with glowing eyes standing at the foot of the staircase. The Warrens quite quickly suggested that the home was occupied by malevolent spirits, with the Warrens' visit to the home being depicted at the beginning of The Conjuring 2. Coming in at number 3 we have the Smurl Haunting. The Smurl Haunting took place between 1974 and 1989, with Jack and Janet Smurl of West Pittston, Pennsylvania, alleging that a demon was inhabiting their home. The claims gained a lot of attention, as you would expect, with demonologists Ed and Lorraine Warren once again stepping in to solve the case. Now, the family moved into their home on Chase Street, with them claiming that they were being disturbed by a demon that caused loud noises and bad odors, with one report stating that the dog was randomly thrown across a room. In 1986, Ed and Lorraine Warren arrived at the home, and according to Ed, the demon that was inhabiting the home was incredibly powerful, with it shaking mirrors and furniture after they tried to get it to leave by playing religious music and praying. Ed even claimed that he felt a significant drop in temperature and saw a dark mass inside of the home. The demon also supposedly left a message on a mirror that read, "Get out." Ed and Lorraine Warren went on to state that their experience at the Smurl residence was unlike anything they had investigated at the time. Coming in at number 2 we have the Snedeker House. Now, many of you will be familiar with the Snedeker House haunting thanks to the movie The Haunting in Connecticut. The Haunting in Connecticut movie was released in 2009 and directed by Peter Cornwell, and supposedly follows the alleged haunting of Carmen Snedeker and her family. Now, the movie has a ton of controversy surrounding it, with the author of the book the movie was based on even distancing himself from the accuracy of the events depicted in the book. Now, the film itself specifically focuses on the fictional Campbells as they move into the new home, which was formerly a mortuary to mitigate the strains of travel on Matt, her cancer-stricken son. However, not long after moving into the new home, the family becomes haunted by violent and supernatural forces. Now, the true story is a lot different. In 1986, Carmen and Alan Snedeker moved into a new home with their daughter and 3 sons. While exploring the home, they discovered tools used by morticians. Very creepy indeed. With it being discovered to be a former funeral parlor, with the eldest son beginning to see ghosts and be haunted by terrifying visions. The family eventually turned to demonologists Ed and Lorraine Warren, who proclaimed that the home was infested with demons. Now, this is supposedly all very much true, however many have had their doubts over the years, including Snedeker's landlord, who found the entire story ridiculous, even noting that prior to the family moving in, there had been no complaints or unusual activity inside of the home. On top of that, the Snedekers stayed for a total of 2 years before finally deciding to leave. And finally, coming in at number 1, we've got Enfield Poltergeist. Taking the Warrens across the ocean, the Enfield Poltergeist has become a popular paranormal case, with it also being the focal point for The Conjuring 2. The Conjuring 2 was released in 2016 and followed Ed and Lorraine as they traveled to Enfield in the United Kingdom to assist the Hodgson family, who was said to be experiencing paranormal activity inside of their home in 1977, with the daughter Janet even becoming possessed by a former resident. Now, this movie is very much based on a true story, however, when a paranormal experience is dubbed real, people tend to try and find holes in the story, with many doubting the accounts of the family. Like I said, the Enfield Poltergeist was a claim of supernatural activity between the years of 1977 to 1979, with it specifically involving involving two sisters, Margaret and Janet. In August of 1977, single-parent Peggy Hodgson claimed she had witnessed furniture moving and heard knocking sounds around her home. A police officer arrived on scene and he himself reported seeing a chair wobble and slide across the floor without any rhyme or reason. Following this, disembodied voices were heard, loud noises echoed around the home, and the children even began levitating. More than 30 people reported seeing furniture move and heard voices around the home. Ed and Lorraine Warren were of course called in to assess the situation, with them visiting the home in 1978 and were convinced that the events had a supernatural explanation. Coming in at number 5, we have the White Lady of Easton. Located in Easton, Connecticut, Union Cemetery is a site that dates back to the 1700s, and according to ghost hunters and paranormal investigators, it is one of the most haunted cemeteries in all of the United States. Now, according to local legend, a ghost haunts Union Cemetery who has been dubbed the White Lady. She's also said to haunt Stepney Cemetery in Monroe as well. She is described as wearing a white nightgown or a wedding dress-esque outfit, with demonologist Ed Warren once claiming to have physical evidence to support these claims. Now, claims of paranormal occurrences at the cemetery had been occurring for decades prior to Ed and Lorraine Warren investigating the location. Ed Warren and several Easton police officers visited the site, which is when Ed supposedly caught the apparition on camera. Ed claimed that several ghost lights came together to form the shape of a woman who had no facial features but had dark hair and was wearing a white dress. Terrifying. Now, there isn't a whole lot of information about the ghost or the cemetery, however, Ed and Lorraine Warren wrote a book about the location entitled Graveyard. Maybe check it out. You do you. Before we jump into number 4, be sure to give this video a big thumbs up, it really helps out a lot. Coming in at number 4, we have the South End Werewolf. Apparently a lot of demonic activity occurs in Essex, with this being one of 2 to appear on our list. Born and raised in Southend in Essex in the United Kingdom, Bill Ramsey began to experience trouble at the young age of 9 years old. He was outside one day when he began to feel a little strange. An icy blast swept over him and a foul stench appeared, causing him to almost vomit. Anger began to take hold and the young boy uprooted a fence post, swinging it around like a club with the fence still attached. It was stated that not even his parents were able to remove the post with their hands. Bill Ramsey then placed the wire meshing of the fence into his mouth and began to chew on it, terrifying his parents in the process, who supposedly ran into their home for safety. Following the incident, things settled, with nothing occurring for 15 years. Bill Ramsey grew up, got married and became a father of 3. However, during this time he was plagued by nightmares, waking up in a cold sweat and feeling dread and unease. Once again, another 15 years passed with no repeated occurrences of what happened when he was a young boy. That was until 1983, when Bill was out at a pub with a few of his friends. After having a few drinks, he began to feel that same chill he experienced when he was young. He went to the bathroom, looked in the mirror, and looking back at him was a werewolf. He hopped in a car with a few friends heading home. However, he began to growl with his hands twisting into claws and proceeded to try to bite his friend's leg. After a handful of incidents that would follow this one, Bill was taken to a psychiatric hospital, with doctors being unable to explain his condition. Bill ultimately traveled to the States to meet Ed and Lorraine Warren, where a priest performed an exorcism on Bill, which supposedly cured him. But not before he partially transformed into a werewolf in front of witnesses. Coming in at number 3, we have the Borley Church haunting. The Borley Rectory was a home located in Essex, England, that gained widespread attention after being dubbed the most haunted home in England, with it being described as such by Harry Price, a psychic researcher. According to reports, the rectory itself has been haunted since it was built, with sudden reports being filed in 1929 after the Daily Mirror published an article detailing the account of a visit by paranormal researcher Harry Price. Now, the first major paranormal event occurred on July 28, 1900, after 4 daughters of the rector, Henry Dawson Ellis Bull, reported seeing the ghost of a nun not far from their house. However, when they tried to approach, the ghost disappeared. Other people throughout the years complained of similar sightings, including phantom coaches driven by headless horsemen. Freaky. However, let's take a look at the church. The hauntings date back even prior to these occurrences, with folklore claiming that the first haunting occurred in the 14th century following the execution of a nun who had an affair with a monk. The Warrens ended up travelling to Essex to investigate the claims of paranormal activity at the rectory, with people reporting ghostly chanting and organ music, along with sightings of the executed nun and of a ghostly monk. Prior to his death, Ed Warren even claimed to have captured a picture of the ghost monk, showing him leafing through a book inside of the church. Borley Church ultimately served as the inspiration for the movie The Nun, which sadly was a major letdown. Also, mostly fiction? Coming in at number 2, we have the Lindley Street haunting.
Lorraine and I were in that house
for almost 3 days and nights. We watched as furniture moved around, smashed, broke. People came in and witnessed this, firemen, priests.
The home located at 966 Lindley Street in Bridgeport, Connecticut is a truly fascinating story, being dubbed the most haunted house in America, with the Warrens referring to it as, I quote, the most important poltergeist case of the last 100 years. The home belonged to Gerald and Laura Goodwin, who lived there along with their adopted daughter Marcia. According to reports, several people claim to see furniture moving on its own accord and a crucifix flying off the wall. For those who know the case, you'll know that one of the key elements to the story is the report that the family cat could speak, with claims surfacing that Sam the cat was caught singing Christmas carols in the family's basement. Now, at some point in time, Marcia confessed that the entire thing was a hoax and that she was responsible for the events that occurred. However, the Warrens weren't having any of it, with Ed and Lorraine believing no child was capable of being behind the incidents they witnessed firsthand. Whether you believe it or not, the case is certainly an interesting one that has divided many. I mean, when the Warrens are involved, you know there is going to be some criticism. Also, how do you explain a talking cat? Like, if its mouth's opening, it's talking. You know? And finally, coming in at number 1, we have Satan's Harvest. Now, many will be familiar with the name Maurice Theriault, or more commonly referred to as Frenchie, thanks to the movie The Nun, with the character appearing throughout. However, I should preface this point by saying that everything that happened in The Nun with Frenchie is in fact fictional, but the character is very much based on a real person. Frenchie was the son of French-Canadian farmers in Maine and grew up in a fairly toxic and abusive household, with his father exhibiting violent tendencies towards him. At the age of 51, Frenchie was living in Massachusetts with his wife Nancy and their children. To friends, he was a gentle man and extremely kind to anyone he met. However, behind closed doors housed something truly evil. He explained that his behavior was the result of being possessed by a demon, which pushed him towards violence. Blood would flow from his eyes and religious markings began to appear on his body. A local parish priest called in the help of Ed and Lorraine Warren because, of course, apparently everyone knows Ed and Lorraine. During their investigation, they saw Frenchie bleed from his eyes and saw symbols appear on his body. He also exhibited superhuman strength, which they believe was the result of demonic possession. They specifically believed that Frenchie had fallen into the grip of Satan himself. 3 exorcisms were performed on Frenchie, the latter of which proved to be something truly terrifying. Frenchie's face began to change, his skin burned and blistered, and on his forehead a deep wound appeared, and his eyes began to look like snake eyes. However, the exorcism ultimately proved to be a success, with him having no incidents following.
Coming in at number 5, we've got the Smurl haunting. Technically, there already is a movie about the Smurl haunting, titled The Haunted, and released as a made-for-TV movie back in 1991, folks with cable television were treated to a horrifying vision of demonic possession in Pennsylvania. However, we live in the golden age of streaming, with brand new top-notch movies and shows being released almost daily. So with the advances in filmmaking technology and maybe some assistance from the research team at Blumhouse, I think this tale could be brought back to life in incredible fashion. Based on what's happened with the mainline Conjuring series lately, it would be interesting to see a return to a strictly haunted house format, but the story here is rich enough to make it work. Here's the real-life story of the Smurls. Hopefully you'll see how it works as a movie. In the mid-70s, Janet and Jack Smurl were forced out of their home due to flood damage. They packed up their stuff, got their kids and parents in a car, and moved down to West Pittston. For a while, they focused their energy on fixing the place up. Some painting needed to be done and old appliances needed to be replaced. Other than that though, all seemed well. This was short-lived, however. Soon, weird things started happening. Tools would disappear without a trace or end up in places far away from where they should be. Stains would seep through brand new coats of paint no matter how thick it was laid on. Kitchen appliances would catch fire even if they weren't plugged in at the time. And of course, terrible smells permeated throughout but would disappear quickly once noticed. Pretty standard haunted stuff if you ask me. But that was just the beginning, as even more noticeable ghastly behavior began. The kids heard disembodied voices that pretended to be their siblings, and Janet insisted that she heard her mother-in-law calling out to her. Dark shapes would float around the house, and one night, one seemed to crawl into bed with the Smurls. Needless to say, they were pretty freaked out. Things hit a fever pitch when the family dog was thrown up against the wall, and Janet was picked up and dangled 3 feet in the air. At that point, it was time to bring in some help. The Warrens arrived and soon found out that there were 3 human spirits in the house, accompanied by a malevolent demon. 2 of the spirits were harmless and the 3rd one was potentially violent, but the demon was the real problem. It made the other spirits do awful things and intensified the haunting plenty. You can see how this would make for an excellent horror movie, right? We meet the Smurls as they're moving in. Things are hunky-dory. However, the kids notice some strange stuff at night and mom and dad are wondering why their renovations aren't holding up. Then something changes and it is full-on haunt mode. Ed and Lorraine show up and the mystery begins to unravel. Tie it in with the other Conjuring flicks and you've got yourself a summer horror blockbuster. Blumhouse, call me. Coming in at number 4, we've got Lindley Street. Here we have another famous haunted house which would perfectly align with the rest of the series had they not switched it up for The Devil Made Me Do It. I'm sure a return to form would go over just fine though. Moving on from my goofy format-based nitpicking, here's a good story. Haunted houses tend to get folks interested in anything, so that's a good start. Also happening in the mid-70s at the time, this was a well-publicized poltergeist. Connecticut is famous for all sorts of haunted and damned locations, but Lindley Street is probably one of the most famous. Gerard and Laura Goodwin, homeowners and Good Samaritans, reported an array of otherworldly attacks in their little bungalow. Windows were broken, furniture was scattered, a cat inexplicably spoke in English, and more. The longer this went on, the more folks became interested. For a while, all sorts of folks that weren't the Goodwins saw these paranormal occurrences too. That's what made this such a high-profile haunting. All sorts of reputable and reliable community members claiming to see insane, seemingly impossible things happening in their peaceful neighborhood. News teams, nosy neighbors, firefighters, police squads, priests, and of course the Warrens were called in to see what they could do. And then, just like the neighbors, the policemen and firefighters saw the paranormal experiences happening. So there are a few ways we could approach this tale of terror in a cinematic fashion. There's the obvious way, which is fitting the events into the Conjuring universe and having all sorts of new characters introduced that could have witnessed the haunting. Classic, can't miss stuff right there. However, the guy in me who took a bunch of film courses at university makes me want to look at this a little differently. You know, I want to hear all sorts of different perspectives, a bit of he said, she said, maybe investigate what each individual saw and see if there is an ultimate answer. If I'm being too vague, I'll come right out and say it. Let's make a haunted house Rashomon. Like, have the Warrens or some surrogate demonologists come in at the very beginning and ask folks what's happening. Then you get accounts from each invested party and every tale is different in some way or another. And then, as is the case with most real-life haunted houses, we don't really come away with a concrete answer. Just the tales of those who experienced it themselves and the tricky job of putting the pieces together ourselves. Think about it. Coming in at number 3, we've got the Donovan family. Ghosts and romance. Ain't nothing better, right? Plus, when was the last time they made a specter-filled love story for the big screen? We got Warm Bodies a while ago, but since then we've really seen nothing new. Maybe a few indie movies where the monsters are surprisingly alluring, and I suppose The Shape of Water counts for something, but all of those have physical monsters to smush. Lust is a hell of a drug, don't you know? So what if we took the story of a girl summoning a ghost via Ouija board and then falling in love with it? Well, that's what happened with the Donovan family haunting. Their daughter brought a demon into the house, dated it for a bit, and then realized that it was just using her to sap at the life force of everyone around. Yikes. You've heard of people being used for their bodies or their money, but their life energy? That's gotta sting a little bit. It would be a fun descent into madness, with audiences realizing halfway through that this otherworldly suitor does not have the protagonist's best interests at heart. Definitely worth a rewatch to see what you missed the first time too. Coming in at number 2, we've got the Southend Werewolf. Now, we've talked about returning to haunted houses a couple times today with varying results, but what about adding a werewolf story to the Conjuring universe? And that's what I'm talking about. The Warrens apparently had a run-in with some sort of lichen adjacent during one of their exorcisms. It wasn't a traditional werewolf. Full moons and silver bullets were more or less left out of the equation. But in the case of Bill Ramsey, a hellish transformation apparently did take place. As a kid, Ramsey had a few bestial outbursts, but seemed to chill out as he got a little older. However, out of the blue, an adult Ramsey started acting absolutely feral once more. After a brief stint in a mental hospital, Ramsey linked up with the Warrens and made his way to the States, where a priest was waiting to perform an exorcism. During this ritual, witnesses claimed to have seen him turn partially into some sort of man-beast. Now, I'd say if you're gonna make a movie about this, you're gonna need to have a full transformation a couple times, you know, to get that American Werewolf in London vibe. Hell, even the backstory should be him actually contorting into a fanged beast and running rampant. It won't be all true, but it will make for some excellent popcorn moments. And finally at number 1 we've got West Point. Unsurprisingly, there are a lot of haunted military academies out there. One of the most famous and therefore most movie worthy is the West Point Academy in New York. For years, cadets, recruits, superintendents, librarians, and more reported weird goings on. Ghost soldiers would appear before frightened students, and items frequently got tossed around. All sorts of colorful undead characters tend to show up here as well. There's the Pusher, a chilling apparition that pushes and holds people down in their sleep, rendering them immobile. Then there's the ghost cook Molly, who is a little disgruntled and likes to rumple bed sheets and smash wine bottles. One of the most famous ghosts here is a soldier turned murderer known as Greer. The Warrens were called in during the 70s to see what they could do about it all and spoke with and did impressions of some of these figures. Any or all of these ghosts would make for a really fun flick filled with poltergeist style scares and ghosts with real personality. Now, I'm sure that in due time we'll see all these stories adapted. The Conjuring universe is an insane moneymaker, and the Warren stories are too good to pass up.
Starting off this countdown, we have the Buddhist exorcism. In the early 2000s, the Warrens took a trip to Japan to check out these haunted tunnels that a number of people have died in. But while they were there, they were contacted to perform an exorcism on a woman named Teresa. This footage is very creepy. Not only is it actual footage of someone that is possessed, but you can also hear the demon in her voice reaching out to talk to Lorraine. In this clip I'm about to show you, Lorraine is trying to reach out to Teresa and get her to fight back against the demon possessing her.
Teresa, you hear me, you understand me. Teresa, leave. Leave, Teresa. Leave, dear, leave. I'm here to help you. I'm here to help you, Teresa.
Things take a turn when Teresa starts speaking in English to Lorraine. I should note that Teresa didn't know English, so clearly it was the demon speaking.
You see your mother? Go with your mother, Teresa. Go with your mother.
Go with your mother.
Go with your mother.
See your mother?
Do you see your mother?
Yeah. Go with her.
She sees her.
Towards the end of the exorcism, Teresa starts lashing out towards Lorraine and others. We see her crawling around and growling like a demon and talking all raspy.
I was here before.
I guess the demon was really fighting back because poor Teresa was going through a lot at this point. The footage ends with Lorraine once again telling Teresa to fight back against the demon. Hopefully they managed to complete this exorcism successfully. Now, I tried to Google this case, but unfortunately there wasn't much information out there on it, so we may never know. In fact, it was after this trip in Japan where Ed got really sick and his health started to decline. Maybe this demon had something to do with it. Moving on to number 4, we have Scotland's underground city. And if you guys are liking this video so far, then why don't you hit that like button?
And today, there still are.
They're still haunted.
Yes. There are people like you that see them. In fact, I've never seen them, but there are people that see these ghosts floating about. Mary King's been seen up here, and she's been seen down at the bottom.
In 1996, Ed and Lorraine Warren visited Edinburgh in Scotland to investigate an underground city. The city was said to be haunted. In the video, you see an older tour guide telling them about the history of this underground city, how there used to be underground shops and stuff like that down there. At one point, he talked about getting bad vibes from being down there, and apparently Lorraine was sensing that as well.
So that's when you get the funny feeling.
I got funny feeling, all right.
However,
very bad feeling.
one by one, they all died off until there was nobody left.
It gets worse when he talks about how everyone died down there and there were just piles of bodies because there was no one left to get rid of them, which is probably why the place is haunted. I mean, a number of people died there and didn't have a proper burial. Well, at one point in the video, Lorraine claims she hears a ghost walking by.
Can't be.
No.
What are you hearing?
Like the sound of people, of more than one person together walking by, and, you know, like heavy clothing rubbing against each other, that type of thing. I could hear.
I'm going home.
And I could hear that, and I wondered. You looked, Frank, so I thought you heard the same thing.
No, I didn't hear it.
Yeah.
That's not all. She started to pick up on another vibe.
It feels like somebody is like squeezing your insides all together, actually. Squeezing the life right out of you.
I have no clue how she wasn't scared to death experiencing all of that. Honestly, she was brave. It blows my mind. In our third spot today, we have the family in Connecticut. And no, this isn't the same as the family from the haunting in Connecticut case. Just apparently, Connecticut has a lot of hauntings. So basically, Ed and Lorraine Warren went to Connecticut to help a family whose home was being haunted by a spirit. What I'm about to show you is real footage from this case. Basically, it starts with Ed and Lorraine sitting at a table praying with the family. Then, Ed tries to make contact with whatever is haunting their house.
Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come.
One knock for yes, two for no. Are you a man? Are you a boy? One knock for yes, two for no. Yes. Okay.
Using that one knock for yes, two knocks for no method, Ed was able to find out more about this ghost.
Most here is it. Is it?
So the ghost was haunting their home and causing a scene because it didn't like the family's mother. But that's not the only ghostly thing that they managed to capture on camera. Later on, Ed asked the ghost to give them a sign, and then the kitchen chair moves on its own.
Give me some sign. Is that you moving something? Give me some sign that you're here. I command you to reveal your identity.
Yeah, no thank you. If that happened at my house, I would be out of there so fast. In our second spot, we have Maurice Theriault. If you've seen the movie The Nun, then you already know about a man named Maurice, or Frenchie. This guy was a hard-working farmer that ended up getting diabolically possessed. This occurred in 1985. Sometimes blood would randomly pour out of his body, like from his nose, eyes, and mouth. And he didn't know what was causing it. He also developed super strength and could randomly understand and speak Latin. At first he went to the police for help, then a priest, and then finally Ed and Lorraine Warren agreed to help him. Now, he apparently went through a number of exorcisms. The footage I'm going to share with you is from his last exorcism. So the footage starts off with Ed asking Frenchie to lift up his shirt. Apparently, random crosses would show up engraved in his skin.
The front. Feet up on the shoulder? Yeah. Move, yeah, you're in the way, right? Yeah. Okay, you're both in
It literally looks like somebody took something sharp and carved crosses into him, and then it scarred up. But those would appear all over his body, randomly appearing and disappearing. During this exorcism, a number of scary things happened. For starters, we see him drooling from his mouth, but as soon as the drool hits his shirt, it turns to blood. Then, at one point, we see Frenchie hunched over in pain. This is apparently because spirits enter people through their solar plexus. And then at another point, we see Frenchie become incredibly still and his face changes completely. He doesn't look like himself. His eyes look so glossy.
How did you enter, Maurice?
And lastly, we see a cut randomly appear on his forehead and start to bleed on its own, out of nowhere. That is absolutely horrifying. And in our number 1 spot, we have the unseen tapes. YouTuber Haley Reese got the chance to actually meet up with Tony Spira, the husband of Judy Warren. He provided her with insight into the Warren cases and actually showed her some unseen exorcism footage. She then uploaded this onto YouTube. In this video, we see Tony and Lorraine Warren performing an exorcism on a man named Roberto. Take a look at it.
This is the power, Jesus Christ. Okay? You hear me? Jesus Christ has all the power. You have none. What is your name?
So in the video, as you just saw, they're trying to find out this demon's name to then help expel it. And guys, you're not gonna believe what demon was inside of him. Here, continue watching.
What is your name? Jesus Christ commanded you to answer that question.
What is your name?
What is your name? Beelzebub? Is that what you're saying? Beelzebub?
This dude was possessed by Beelzebub. When I heard that, I literally got shivers down my spine. Like, holy. So for those of you that don't know, in Christian texts, the name Beelzebub is often associated with the devil himself. They would alternate between using this name and Satan. He is considered one of the 7 princes of hell, and he is associated with the sin of gluttony. In other texts, he is described as the lieutenant of hell. He's second in power to Satan. It's crazy, but hold on. He wasn't just possessed by Beelzebub, but by other entities as well.
What other entity is inside you? God is commanding you. In the name of Jesus Christ, and all the saints, and all the martyrs, and all the angels command you to answer that question. What is it? Abaddon.
I genuinely don't know how they stayed so calm as this dude lists all the demons possessing him. The video went on and they found at least 4 demons were inside of him. They then asked the demons why they were possessing Roberto, and they replied with power.
Why are you in Roberto? Why are you there with Roberto? Jesus Christ doesn't like demonic spirits within a human spirit. Jesus Christ hates demonic spirits to be within a human being. You know that? You hate Jesus, huh?
I don't know about you, but that creeped me out. It is terrifying. With that being said, let me know which one of these cases freaked you out the most. Starting off this countdown, we have the Smurl family haunting. Back in the 1980s, the Smurl family swore that their house was haunted. They would hear loud noises, smell foul odors, and hear pig grunts. Apparently, whatever was haunting their house also threw their dog to the wall and pushed one of their daughters down the stairs. Of course, Ed and Lorraine Warren came to investigate and they claimed that this place was haunted. They even said that they saw a message appear on a mirror that read, "Get out." But get this, members of the clergy were brought in to do a blessing and an exorcism on the house. And guess what? They reported nothing unusual happened there. In fact, one of the priests had this to say about the Warrens, and I quote, "They weren't sincere, were not what they purported to be, and were given to sensationalizing." In the end, the church said that the family was just stressed over the health of their son who had brain surgery, and the foul odor that they smelt was because of a cracked sewer pipe right by their home. But the Warrens were adamant that the house was haunted, and then they turned the story into a book and made some money, so just saying. Coming in at number 4, we have the Amityville Horror. This probably is one of the most controversial paranormal cases of all times, because in the end, the whole thing was just one big sham. Here's a little rundown. On November 13th of 1974, Robert Butch DeFeo killed his parents and then his 2 brothers and 2 sisters. The house was then put up for sale and the Lutz family moved in. And apparently, the demon that got Butch to do that horrific deed started to attack this new family. Their doors and cupboards would swing open and close, green slime would ooze from their ceiling, and one time a demonic face with red glowing eyes was seen looking into the house, so on and so on. Now, how were the Warrens involved? Well, when paranormal investigators heard of what happened, they all contacted the family to go investigate the house for themselves. Of course, the Warrens were one of the individuals to contact them and set up a time to go check out the house for themselves. They spent the night at the house with others to see if it truly was haunted. In the end, they concluded that it was. Lorraine Warren claimed that she sensed great malevolence in the house and that there were multiple demonic entities there. But this was all BS because William Weber, Butch's lawyer, admitted that he made up this whole story along with George Lutz and a writer, Jay Anson. He said, and I quote, "They created the story over many bottles of wine. They admitted the house was never really haunted. They just made it all up." Which means so did the Warrens.
Sometimes you close your eyes and see the place where you used to live. This is true of Ed and Lorraine Warren as well. In fact, they were experiencing paranormal happenings way before they were in the spotlight. Looking back at their lives pre-demonology, there were lots of events that seemed to push them towards their career. Call it luck, call it destiny, the world seemed to have a whole lot of unexplainable events in store for the Warrens. Before Lorraine had even met Ed and still had her maiden name, she started to see things other people couldn't. At the young age of 9, she began noticing that some people were surrounded by different types of auras. Back then, she just assumed that everyone could see that. However, it became clear that these clairvoyant abilities were specific to her over time. Ed also had some paranormal experiences young, as he claimed that he lived in a haunted house when he was a boy. That kind of experience would drive anyone towards exploration of those kind of themes, right? Doors would open and shut on their own, and sourceless lights would appear in his home. Interesting, right? Well, these early appearances did a lot to inspire the duo to look deeper into the unknown as they aged. However, being young and inexperienced, they were also vulnerable to demonic possession. Neither ever told any stories of being under the influence of an entity while still a child, but they very well could have. A lot of demonic possession seem to happen in children, whether that means that they're more vulnerable to manipulation or their connection to the spirit world is stronger. So as young folks with a predisposition towards the unknowable side of things, they were at risk of falling under the influence more than most. In the end, it seems they fortunately avoided such a fate, but the world of demonology and as a result pop culture at large would look a whole lot different if either Ed or Lorraine's experiences were a little darker early on. It's wild to think what kind of cascading effects might have happened had they grown up a little differently. Ed apparently had to jump from a blazing oil tanker while serving in the Navy, and while swimming in that frigid water and fighting for his life, he prayed for help and was soon rescued. That near-death experience inspired him to profess his love for Lorraine and marry her. Imagine if instead he had questioned his faith or given into darker ways after such an event. Huh. Coming in at number 4, we've got the Smurl Succubus. Anytime a succubus or incubus gets involved, you know things are going to get tricky. Humans are often weak in the face of temptation, and this kind of thing does not exclude famous demonologists. I won't go too deep into the details here, but Ed and Lorraine are not universally loved, and there are some very questionable stories about the two and their predispositions. This comes into play during the investigation of the Smurl family. In the mid-80s, this family contacted Ed and Lorraine for help with their haunting. After moving into their house over a decade ago, they'd experienced numerous terrifying ordeals. Their dog was thrown against the wall with force by an unseen presence. Their daughter was pushed down the stairs. Jack Smurl's ear was bitten, and both he and his wife Janet were assaulted by a demon. The last was apparently a succubus or an incubus, and you know what kind of assault those demons are interested in. So when Ed and Lorraine arrived on the scene, they already knew what was going on. Confirming that the Smurl house was indeed haunted, they got to work trying to figure out what to do about it. During their time investigating, Ed noticed a strange dark mass, and it really put him on edge. Apparently he was also left a message by the dark forces at play, one that read, "Get out." And that didn't go over well with Ed. Wanting to defeat this succubus, Ed came back with holy water and rosaries. He used these tools to fight against the demon, but to little avail. Apparently he was thrown 10 feet through the air by the demon and attacked on multiple occasions. Had he stuck around much longer, who knows what would have happened. In the end, he admitted he was not strong enough to deal with this presence and reached out to the Vatican. They sent an exorcism team and the house was indeed eventually cleansed. A happy ending for sure, but that is definitely a close call for Ed and Lorraine, don't you think? Coming in at number 3, some Snedeker suspicions. In a different haunted house, this time occupied by the Snedeker family, another demon had a hold on their residence. Poltergeist attacks attacks were common, and the Snedekers were also being assaulted by whatever presence was inside. The house, which was once a funeral parlor, was home to many terrible experiments and abuses upon the deceased. It was said that the man running the place beforehand would use corpses in dark rituals, and even use the bodies for unspeakable acts. So when Ed and Lorraine showed up, they had a lot to do. After hearing stories of the Snedekers being grabbed and their clothes being tampered with, they reached out to the local church and performed an exorcism. This could have ended poorly, as Ed admitted that the presence was terrible and diabolical. Had this exorcism gone south, all involved could have been hurt, possessed, or worse. Coming in at number 2, we've got the Union Cemetery sighting. Here's another famous case. In fact, the notoriety of the ghost present here goes beyond Ed and Lorraine's influence. They added to it for sure, but the White Lady of Union Cemetery is well known all on her own, thank you very much. So much so that she's contributed to many classic urban legends. Now when does she get a movie, right? Well, regardless of movie magic, Ed almost fell victim to this particular ghost one time. Although, to be honest, she seems more benevolent than malevolent. Attracting all sorts of paranormal enthusiasts from across the United States, the White Lady has made quite a name for herself. Late night motorists might notice a pale figure ahead on the map and slow down to see if they need help. Often she'll just disappear at that point, but sometimes she'll try to hitch a ride with them back to the cemetery itself. Ed and Lorraine took a trip out to Union to see what they could find and ended up running into the White Lady herself. Trusty video camera in hand, Ed supposedly captured footage of the White Lady. The evidence is so controversial and important that it was kept hidden for years. To this day, the legitimacy of this footage is called into question, and I'm sure that the ghost herself wasn't too happy about being potentially caught on camera. One has to wonder if she made any attempt to prevent the Warrens from getting a good shot. And finally, at number 1, we've got the Perron predicament. Most folks would be happy to have some famous demonologists on their side when fighting off whatever's invaded their home. However, if it's not going so well, or if you haven't heard of the folks trying to help you, things could play out a little differently. Although the Warrens' involvement with the Perron family is the focal point of the first Conjuring movie, things didn't exactly play out that way. After the Perrons purchased their Rhode Island home, things started getting weird. They experienced a number of paranormal attacks from all sorts of vengeful spirits. At a loss, they reached out to a number of paranormal experts, eventually being visited by the Warrens. However, this didn't help out all that much. In fact, the patriarch of the Perron family eventually had to ask the Warrens to leave his family alone, as their intervention seemed to be making the demons angrier. Hell, they might have been egging the demons on to go bigger. Maybe if they stuck around a little bit longer, the demons would have found a way into the Warrens. It wouldn't be too surprising considering how upset the Perrons were at the amount of help they were getting. Wild, right? You can't always trust the movie for the full story.